The sun was dipping behind Columbia's skyline, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. Marcus Kane, a black CIA operative, eased his sleek black SUV to a stop, heading home after a long day in the field. Then, flashing lights pierced the rearview mirror. Hands gripping the wheel, his heart thumped, not from fear but from disbelief. The officer had stopped him. No crime, no call, just suspicion. And in that moment, the line between authority and prejudice blurred, setting the stage for a confrontation that would shake him and the city forever. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe so more stories like this reach people who need to hear them. Marcus Kane was 2 hours from home, the weight of another long field operation pressing against his shoulders. The streets of Columbia, South Carolina, stretched quiet and serene, tree-lined avenues, brick mailboxes, and the kind of old money homes that whispered of generational comfort. His black SUV slowed at a stop sign, just a fraction too long, just enough to catch the eye of a patrolling officer. Marcus wasn't concerned. He'd faced tension before. In foreign countries, in high-stakes interrogations, in rooms where a single misstep could cost lives, but something about being stopped here, in his own city, felt different. The officer's cruiser lights flicked on behind him, cutting through the fading evening like a blade. Marcus eased to the curb, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. He rolled down the window, the cool air brushing his face, and gave a polite nod. "Evening, officer," he said, calm but steady. From across the car, the officer's gaze lingered, scrutinizing not just Marcus's documents, but him. Marcus felt the subtle weight of suspicion, the invisible ledger of assumptions being measured against his skin, his presence, his car. He offered his license and registration immediately, hands steady, voice controlled. "CIA off-duty," he added, letting the words hang, not as a threat, but as fact. The officer scanned the papers, then looked back at him. Marcus noticed the twitch of indecision, the hesitation between protocol and instinct. And just like that, a routine stop became something far more dangerous, a test of judgment, authority, and the invisible biases that lurk beneath the badge. Marcus realized with a sinking certainty that this wasn't about him. It was about what others thought he could or couldn't be. The officer stepped closer, voice tight, as if the day's routine stop had morphed into a judgment he alone could deliver. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, eyes fixed on Marcus. Marcus's hands stayed on the wheel, fingers relaxed but ready. "Am I being detained?" he asked calmly, each word deliberate. The line between lawful order and prejudice blurred in the officer's tense stance. Around them, neighbors had begun to watch, some from porches, others from cars, phones raised, the red recording lights blinking in silent testimony. "I need to ask a few more questions," the officer continued, almost rehearsed. Marcus shook his head slightly, voice steady. "You've verified my license, registration, and identity. What else do you need?" The officer's gaze flicked to the SUV, then back to him. Marcus could see the internal debate. Pride versus protocol, assumption versus evidence. "I just need to confirm a few things," he said. "You're assuming things about me," Marcus replied evenly. "Assuming I'm a threat. Assuming I've done something wrong, simply because of how I look or where I drive. Is that law or is that prejudice?" Marcus remained calm, a model of restraint. He didn't reach for his ID again. He didn't raise his voice. He simply let the officer's actions speak for themselves. Each hesitation, each question beyond reason, each pause to call in verification only confirmed what he already knew. Authority can be wielded without justice. The officer's hand drifted toward his holster, a subtle but unmistakable signal. Marcus's pulse tightened, but he stayed still, hands visible. "Touch me without cause," he said quietly, "and the consequences won't be mine alone to bear." A second patrol car arrived, and Officer Marcy Keller stepped out, scanning the scene. "What's going on here?" she asked, voice calm but firm. Marcus gave her a small nod, brief acknowledgement. She turned to the first officer, eyes sharp, commanding without aggression. Marcus didn't need to speak. The presence of another law enforcement professional observing his restraint was enough to shift the tension. The first officer stepped back, jaw tight, his pride warring with the clear evidence that he had overstepped. Marcus exhaled softly, not in relief but in quiet recognition that the situation had escalated far beyond a single traffic stop. For those watching, the scene was a mirror. A black man, off-duty, competent, calm, restrained, yet still presumed suspicious. Authority versus justice. Bias versus restraint. In those long minutes, Marcus Kane understood something stark. The danger wasn't just in what could happen to him, but in what this moment revealed about the system itself. The street had become a courtroom. The witnesses were the neighbors. And the verdict? Still unwritten. Marcus's pulse was steady, but the tension in the air was electric. The officer's fingers hovered near his holster again, a silent threat that didn't go unnoticed by the growing crowd. Marcus kept his hands visible, voice low but firm. "I am asking you to act within the law, not your assumptions," he said. "You need to step out of the vehicle," the officer repeated, tone sharper now. Pride and authority colliding in every word. "I am not resisting lawful orders," Marcus replied, "but you have no evidence I've committed a crime. This is harassment, plain and simple." A few neighbors began speaking up, voices trembling but clear. "He's CIA. He hasn't done anything." A teen raised a phone, live streaming the unfolding confrontation. Every blink, every gesture, every step toward the SUV was now public record. The officer's stance stiffened, the invisible weight of an audience pressing down on him. Marcus watched calmly, noting the shift, the hesitation, the internal struggle, the realization that authority without restraint was being observed by witnesses who wouldn't forget. A second officer moved closer, voice gentle but commanding. "You need to step back," she said to the first officer, scanning Marcus for any sign of threat. Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging her presence without speaking. The first officer's jaw tightened. He was cornered, not by force, but by the undeniable clarity of right and wrong. Marcus slowly leaned forward, careful not to provoke. "Touch me without cause, and this will have consequences beyond this street," he said quietly. The calm in his tone made it worse for the officer. Here was a trained operative, off-duty, restrained, and yet fully aware of his legal rights. Finally, the officer stepped back, uncertainty flashing across his face. Marcus exhaled softly, but there was no relief, only the knowledge that the confrontation had reached its peak. Every second of the stop, every assumption, every microaggression had now been exposed, not just to him, but to the crowd, to the city, to the world watching through small screens and smartphones. The climax was not a violent act, nor a dramatic arrest. It was the undeniable confrontation between authority misused and justice calmly asserted. Marcus's restraint became a mirror, reflecting the systemic bias and the urgent need for accountability. In that quiet standoff, the truth was louder than any badge, louder than any siren, and impossible to ignore. The officer finally stepped back, hands lowering, tension still coiled in his shoulders. Marcus remained seated, watching, breathing even, aware that the moment was over but the consequences had only begun. By the next morning, video clips were everywhere. Social media ignited with debates about authority, bias, and racial profiling. News outlets dissected every frame, every word, every pause. Marcus Kane's calm defiance became a symbol, not of confrontation, but of measured courage in the face of assumption and prejudice. Inside the Columbia Police Department, internal reviews were launched. The first officer faced administrative scrutiny, bias retraining, and suspension. Colleagues debated quietly. When does instinct cross into misconduct? When does authority demand humility over pride? Marcus's presence, though off-duty, had forced a hard conversation, one that many officers had never considered so personally. For Marcus, the experience was sobering. He reflected on his father, a retired patrolman who had warned him that some would judge him before they knew him. He thought of his own career, years spent protecting others in situations where judgment could be life or death, and realized that even in his hometown, he was not immune. Power without restraint can harm anyone, and sometimes the greatest strength lies in the ability to stand firm without escalating. The incident became a teaching moment. In community centers, classrooms, and public forums, people discussed the difference between authority and accountability. Marcus's story reminded the city that bias is not always overt, and justice is not simply about rules, it's about respect, observation, and restraint. As he drove again through the same streets, Marcus glanced at the rearview mirror, steady and reflective. The lights of Columbia glimmered, quiet now, but the lesson remained vivid. Power means nothing without responsibility, and respect is earned in the hardest moments. He had lived it, and the city had seen it. If this story made you think, made you feel, or made you question what authority really means, hit that like button. And don't miss more stories that shine a light on injustice. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a voice that matters.